Welcome to For the Love of Books, Bees Books Edition, a podcast by North Lanarkshire Libraries.
Hi, this is Pari.
And this is Jenny, and we're here to talk about
Bees Books. I had a flourish.
You did?
Both of my hands.
I think we're both overexcited because we've just done a children's group.
Yes.
And yeah.
We don't usually, that's true.
No, exactly.
We usually record on a Tuesday and we just have
And it's first thing in the morning and it's kind of relaxed.
Today it's sunny and it's lovely.
Yes.
We had a lovely child come in. So yes, that's true. You're
It's
right.
full of sunshine today.
It is.
Yes.
Metaphorical and literal.
Which
We're
doesn't
giddy.
often happen.
Yeah.
But never
Yes.
mind.
But yes, so today the theme that I kept forgetting about, I knew it was something to do with numbers, but it's actually lucky numbers.
Yes.
So that's the theme for the books today. And what do you have?
So this
I'm
wasn't
jumping
my
straight into it.
this wasn't my original choice, and I'm
Okay.
just going to make sure I pick up the right one first.
I know you have a bouquet of offerings.
So I chose
Mm.
The Hunger Games, the teenage book The Hunger
okay.
Games, which you're looking puzzled about. And I will
am.
explain briefly why I chose this.
Yeah.
Because basically, lucky numbers took me to the lottery,
Okay.
and basically The Hunger Games is just a
lottery,
lottery, but an
oh.
unlucky lottery.
Uh-huh.
So it's completely opposite of what Bee's asked us to do, but that's fine. I'm
No,
sure she won't
it's
mind.
lucky for the winner.
Well,
because they
yes.
get food and
Yes.
fame and then a lottery again in this series. So
Yes,
yeah,
it
swings and
happens.
roundabouts.
Yes.
Yes. What
So
about
have you chosen?
So I am not going to explain my things until it is time.
Okay.
But so last time, we had space.
Yep.
And both our offerings, mostly, I think you had one sort of
Mm-hmm.
random choice put in, but they were very space related. This time I went in the opposite direction.
Excellent.
And I'm trying to fit in lucky numbers in a way that might make sense only to me. I don't know if you'll be convinced. I don't know if we will be convinced. Little Women by Louisa May Alcott.
Interesting.
Yeah, I know you look as puzzled as I did.
And also
The
a lovely
Hunger Games.
cover. I've not seen this
Isn't
cover
it just
before.
beautiful? I think
Yes.
it came out after the most recent movie adaptation because it says in tiny little letters, now a major motion picture, very subtle, which
Yes.
I quite like. I don't like the big stickers.
No. And then the pictures of the people in the film.
I
on it.
hate that. Oh, that's my pet peeve.
Yep.
And my second offering is Days Like These, an alternative guide to the year in 366 poems by
Okay, so
Brian Bilston.
This one I'm getting because there's 366. Why there's 366, I don't know. But there's numbers in there.
There is numbers, yeah. Are they lucky? Are they unlucky? We'll find out. But first, your
okay.
other books.
So my other ones are book 2 and book 3. Because basically what I wanted to first of all say is I like 3s. That is my number. And I like books written in 3s. So if you were writing a crime series, for example, like the lovely J.D. Kirk and the Logan books, I want 40 of them. Definitely, please write more, 40 of them. But when it's something that's a specific story, I want 3. I don't mind if there's another 3, but after that 3, I like it to end.
Yeah.
If you see what I mean.
I
So,
do.
for example, Tamsin Muir.
Yeah.
She was going to do 3. Now she's doing
She
4,
lied to us,
5 or 6. But at
Oh,
least
hopefully not.
you hope that there's an end
Yeah.
to those. Plus, we forgive her because they're fabulous, but also because it needed an extra one. Because
And you want to do what's best for the
yes,
story.
yeah. And I wouldn't mind if she finishes it after book 4 and then does a 10 years later and does another 3. But I like my stories to, so for example, Robin Hobb, I love her to bits. I love all her books. They're done in 3s.
Yeah.
But some of them are done in 3s and then there's like a break and then there's another 3.
Yeah.
But for that 3 stories, that 3 books, the story has finished.
Yeah.
And that's what I like.
I think trilogies had quite
Trilogy. Thank you, Pari. The whole time I was like 3s. That's not the word I'm looking for. Trilogy. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I just casually mentioned it. But I just think trilogies had a sort of, they were a phenomenon for a really long time.
Yeah.
But now it seems to be like, even with the Hunger Games, you know, she's written a prequel.
Yes.
I don't know if there's just one.
At the moment, I think.
Yeah.
Just one.
And sort of people are doing that more.
Which I don't mind, because you've got your 3 basic ones, and then
Yeah.
there's other things happening.
Yeah, but I think 3 is a good number. Even Naomi Novik's The Sholoman series, is that how you say it? Yes, so that is
Possibly.
how you say it. But the Evil School Book, or
Yes.
not the Evil School Book. Yeah, that was 3 as well. You're right,
Yes.
there is something, because it doesn't seem intimidating,
No.
the number. Like, if you want to get into a series and you're like, oh, there's 40 books. Oh, that seems too much, especially if they're not standalone. Like, I'm assuming J.D. Kirk would be standalone.
Yes, you can. I mean, there's a story arc, but
Yeah.
you can read them. Don't ever do this, but you can read them out of sequence and things like that.
Or like Discworld, for example.
yes,
You could like,
yes.
But if it's like a series where there isn't a neat ending to the things, a 3 seems like a nice enough number.
Yes.
Even the other one, S.A. Chakrabarti, The City of Brass, Gold,
Yes, which we both love.
Bronze. Yeah.
And we've not spoken about
Perfect.
actually.
Yes. Oh, you're right. Another a new thing. But yes, it's like trilogies are complete. So
Yes.
I am convinced by your
Yes.
luckiness of the
Yes,
number.
I'm trying to think of other trilogies, so even like Lord of the Rings and things
Uh-huh.
like that, you know, and you kind of know where the end is,
Yeah.
even though there might be like outside
Yeah.
books that kind of come along. So that's one of the reasons I chose Hunger Games. The other reason is because it was shiny and on the shelf, and I had never
Always
read
a
it.
good reason.
Yes.
You'd never read The Hunger Games?
This completely passed me by for some unknown reason, because I loved it, absolutely loved it.
Oh.
But at the time, it just passed me by. We've
Oh,
recently got
wow,
ones that have
okay.
come in at very nice covers. They're very nice.
Yeah,
very nice
they're not
covers.
the covers I recognize. So
No.
I'm a little cold towards
Oh.
them, but I see that because they didn't pass me by. I read them when I was a teenager, and I think for books that you really enjoy when you're younger, you tend to like, even like for the Harry Potter books, like I grew up reading them. Those covers, as much as like beautiful covers have come up after that, they are mine.
Yes.
Whereas these are like, they're for other people,
Yeah.
but they're not for me. But yes, no,
Well, it's a
I
bit like we were talking before about Terry Pratchett. The new covers are lovely,
Yeah.
but we both
No.
like the
prefer the original. I mean,
yes.
and even they might not even be original. There might have been something
No,
before.
exactly, but that's the ones that we know
Yeah.
of, we're familiar with. So,
Yeah.
but they completely passed me by, the Hunger Games. Like, I am now in a rabbit warren because I'm going down the Maze Runner and the Version series and all that kind of stuff. I absolutely love them. They are quite dark though, and the further into you get of the trilogy, they get darker and darker and darker. And at one point I was like, oh, I'm glad I didn't read these when I was a teenager, because they're quite dark.
Well, I feel like I was able to deal with it much better as a teenager. So they're dystopias, right? Like, it's the dystopian genre, and I do guest lectures for a university in Leeds on dystopia. So I've been doing that for the last few years, and I think it was the last year, maybe a couple of years ago, that I decided that I'll like to get into the mood of the lecture. I'll sort of reread the Hunger Games again, or re-listen to, I think, something. The Hunger Games again, the whole trilogy, for the first time after I'd read it as a teenager. And it might have been the time as well, like during the pandemic, or just after, or not like still during, but just like after the lockdowns and things. It, like, I remember walking around in my local park and I was just crying, because it is really dark. I feel like I've become more extra sensitive as the older I grow, and I feel like I was much more accepting of the violence. So just to sort of, do you want to give a brief?
Yes, I'm thinking maybe we should, instead of seeing how much like them, tell people about them. So basically the premise is, it seems to be like America after some kind of catastrophe, and there are 12 districts, and then there's the capital. The capital is all very futuristic and very nice, and then each of the districts have a speciality. So District 12, which is where our hero's from, is kind of coal production. One of the other ones kind of is more farmland, one of the ones technology. So they all have their own thing, and it's hinted that in the past the districts kind of rose up against the capital, and this is now their way of keeping everybody in check, basically. That once a year they have the Hunger Games. I'm doing speech quotes, sorry. And basically every child between the ages of 12 and 18 are put into a big bowl. Their name's put into a big bowl, and one boy and one girl from each district is chosen to go to the Hunger Games. The Hunger Games is like a cross between I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here and like something like that. So it's all televised and everything, but these 24 kids have basically to kill each other and be the one left surviving. The one left surviving, their district gets food, because the districts are kind of, you know, they're not kind of allowed loads of food and all that kind of stuff that goes to the capital. They just get, you know, a very small amount, but the winning district gets, you know, more food for a year, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's the kind of premise behind it. In the first book, our hero, Katniss, what you can do is you can put your name in, but for extra food you can put your name in again. And she's put her name in quite a few times. And this year her sister is of an age where her name is put in. Her name's only in once, you know, all the other kids have maybe got their names in 3 or 4 times. However, surprise, surprise, her sister's name is called. And one of the things about the Hunger Games is you can step in, you can take their place. So Katniss takes Primrose's place and goes to the Hunger Games, and obviously has to battle to stay alive. And it gets quite dark.
Well, I feel like the first book was the most hopeful of the books, which is very contrary to our sort of ideas of narrative, you know. And like, because I remember I'd completely forgotten, so when I did the most recent reread a couple of years ago, I'd completely forgotten how it ends, as we discussed my terrible memory. It was like me reading it anew. And the third book, I mean, I don't know that the series ends happily. It ends quite like, so it just put me in a funk. So, but perfect for lecturing about dystopias.
So absolutely, and talking about it.
And you know, like, also, like, I think reading it when I was not a teenager and knew more about the world, I think as an adult, I couldn't help but draw connections, especially like in a country like India. And I grew up in a big city, Mumbai. And I kept sort of comparing the capital to Mumbai, or even anywhere here, like in the UK, London, I guess, or Glasgow, versus the more deprived parts of the country, and the comparisons that you can make, because whenever you write about the future, you're actually writing about the present, right? Like whatever is, because Suzanne Collins has said as well that I think she was right. It was kind of like a critique about reality shows and the news and wars and things. So like, while this is happening, which is not at all relatable in 2024. No. So yeah, it's really interesting to think about, but that's what I think makes me more sensitive to it now, because I'm like, I
think as well, as a grown-up, you kind of see things slightly, you know, from the grown-up perspective, whereas if you were a teenager reading it, you would be kind of seeing it more from, you know, the teenage perspective. I also liked as well, like, I'm not going to spoil it too much for people that haven't read it like me before I read it, but basically Katniss is kind of caught up in politics. Basically she's used as a tool, and she doesn't know at first that she's getting used, so she's just trying to basically stay alive, to get home, to get her district some more food, but there's things going on behind the scenes, and then as the books go on, you know, she becomes basically a figurehead for this rebellion. She never asked for that. It's just forced on her, and like every decision she makes, you know, has an effect on that, and like her relationships as well. You know, there's a boy that she quite likes but doesn't know she likes, and then there's a boy that likes her. You know, there's a whole kind of love triangle going on there. And however, you spoke about the ending there. I don't think it could have ended any other way. I'm not going to spoil it for people, but I don't think, if it ended all happy and bright, it wouldn't be in the same books, if you see what I mean.
I mean, I suppose the genre of dystopia is, like, I guess there needs to be a little bit of hope in the end, which I suppose there is of a sort. But it is, it can't be like you tie it up narratively in like a Disney ending.
No, exactly, and that would have spoiled it. You know, but there's so much in it as well. Absolutely, like, as I say, from the adult point of view as well. Like, so any surviving people that go through the Hunger Games become like what's the word I'm looking for here? Like a kind of guardian to the if, you know, from their district next time. But if you imagine that you've,
The
went
trauma
through
of
the Hunger Games, you survived, you've killed another 20 odd kids. And then next year, you're told that basically, and you could be 14 at this point, you have to basically look after these kids and train them up to do exactly what you did. And then it's interesting further into the books to see some of the other tributes, as they call, and how they've survived, how they've processed what they've done. And the one for District 12 is very drunk. A lot of the time he's very
I don't
drunk.
blame him.
No.
I do not blame him.
But again, further in the books, you realise it's darker than you imagined. These survivors are kind of used by the capital for things, and it's kind of, I know teenage books are teenage books, but I was like, oh
I know, and like I think it's the relationships in the book that I really like obviously the plot and stuff is really compelling, you can read it completely.
I read all three back to back,
Yeah.
because I read the first one not thinking about B at all, and I thought, and we didn't have the middle book, so I had to wait for quite some time before I got the middle book, and then I read it in the third book straight afterwards, because it's a bit like Star Wars. I always have to watch like the original two, the second and the third one together, because Han Solo can't stay frozen that long. But it was like that. I had to read them right, if you know what I mean, and I will buy them and in a few years' time read them again. Slower this time, maybe.
No, because I think the plot is so compelling, but when you revisit it like I did, or at least maybe it was the time and sort of stage of my life, that for me it was how they build these connections, like really unexpected connections, but that are really crucial to not just their success and survival, but to their life, to sort of be a person in this kind of dystopian society, which is a segue to
Excellent.
Little Women. Is that it is, so it's I don't know if you've read Little Women, Jenny.
I have seen various
adaptations.
Yes, but I don't think I've ever read it.
So it was written in the 1800s.
Your book also looks a lot thicker than...
It's the first two books. So it was, when Little Women was written, it was just Little Women. The second book was Good Wives, because it was a roaring success, the first book. And then it was like Good Wives, and then there's Little Men, and there's Joe's Boys. So it's like it's a four. Yeah, it is four. So not three. Quadruplet? I don't think that's how you...
4 of them.
Yes, 4 of them. Which may be a lucky number.
Yes,
But there's 4 sisters in it, in March sisters. It's like, I think, so my lucky thing is completely squeezed in. There's 4 sisters, and one sister dies. Sorry, spoiler alert for a book that's quite old.
I will always remember the episode of Friends where Joey puts it in the fridge.
Right, me too. I was thinking of that. So it becomes 3, but your lucky number, so that's 3 sisters.
Although I wouldn't want to kill somebody off just for that.
But then they squeeze in the first 2 books into one. So it's like, now it's Little Women and Good Wives usually come together. So it's become a trilogy again.
Yay!
But I really love, so I think the relationships are crucial in this book, because it's quite an old-fashioned book in most ways, because it was written and religion is a big part of it, and it's not, there's no big theatrics or play, it's not like a plot driven thing. It's just about this family. It's a story, but there's some of the stuff is quite modern. I think that explains its success even now, that there's so many adaptations and there's so many, because the kinds of relationships they have, the kinds of troubles they have, you can interpose it to now time, in a different way, obviously.
And that's what a timeless classic is.
Absolutely.
You can do that.
Yeah, but I think this was, so it was really lucky for sure for Louisa May Alcott, because she has based this on her family. She grew up in real poverty. When she was a kid, her father was this really, Bronson Alcott was this really radical thinker and sort of doer, I guess. And he was an abolitionist, so was against slavery, but so much so that he would refuse to wear or eat anything that had slavery, so no sugar, no cotton, nothing. And he also was very averse to work, it seems, from all accounts. So he, like, his wife and the 4 daughters were really, like, they grew up really poor. Not the kind of genteel poverty that's shown in Little Women, but like really poor. So she was very much Jo. So she's written about her family in this book. So you can, like, I've read like sort of stories about it, like the biography about it, and she's a fascinating woman. So she wrote, she became really famous. No, she didn't become famous. She gained success for writing the kind of sensation stories that Jo writes, which is lots of drama and romance and murder and crime and all these things. And she loved it. Like, at that time, it wasn't the thing for a lady to write these kinds of stories, but she had a great time. Like, she was getting money for it. She was having fun. But then I think her publisher said that, oh, why don't you write a story for girls? And she's like, I don't want to write a story for girls. I don't know any girls. I don't like girls. And they're like, no, but you know, that's been the thing now. You might get more money. So she'll do anything for a paycheck, this woman.
Fair enough.
So she decided, okay, the only girls I know are my family. So she wrote this book about them. And it complete, like, one of her sisters dies as well. So she's written a lot about that, like the kinds of things they do. She's taken from her journals. And it's just a really lovely story. Like, I spent the last couple of weeks in, like, with this, the first and second book. And I want to return, you know, even though, like, I don't agree with all, obviously, like, the things and the people. But for me, I am Jo, like Jo March. Like, I identify, and then I know there are other people who identify with other characters, including Laurie, who could be an honorary March sister, the boy there. But it's just like a really fantastic book. And the first book made her so much money. Like, it was phenomenally successful. So I think it was lucky, like, writing about
her, absolutely.
And I think we're quite lucky that it's sort of lasted for us for so long, because I know that the adaptations do different things with it as well. Like, like when I said you're writing about the future, you're writing about now, I think it's the same with past. When you're adapting the past, you're writing the present into it a little bit. So I think this kind of timeless classic, as you say, has room for people to read what they want into.
I'm interested as well, because if you said to me her name, I would think Little Women. I didn't realise she had written scandalous, fabulous things as well.
Yeah.
And obviously this is a book that has survived all that time.
Yeah.
And that just shows you how good it is.
Absolutely. But I also love her for her pettiness, which is that her first book, Little Women, was so popular. She got, like, lots of letters from these little girls saying that, oh, please, Jo and Laurie have to end up together. You know, this is because it starts when they're, like, teenagers, like young teenagers, and then it ends when they are, like, adults and grown up and, like, married and things. And she's like, no, I'm not going to do this, because she never married. And there's, like, sort of theories and scholarship that she might have been gay. She might have, like, you know, not identified with, like, just the being a woman at that time and all the strictures, the sort of the rules and things. She hated it. She didn't want anything to do with it. And Jo is a bit like that as well. But she's like, I don't want to marry Jo to Laurie. If she wanted Jo to be a spinster, like, that was her original wish, just like herself. Because she's like, she's just going to have a great time. She's going to write all these rollicking tales and be fabulously successful and wealthy. But because she got so many letters, she got so annoyed that she's like, nope, I'm going to put Laurie together with Amy. Sorry again, spoiler alert. And I love some pettiness from her writers.
Absolutely.
I'm very irritated.
Now, I think we're all fairly familiar with Little Women, but Good Wives, I'm assuming this is when they are.
So it is only when Meg is married, actually. It starts off with, like, Meg's wedding, and it's more about them going out of their houses. So Amy goes to Europe for a few years. Beth, like, tragically dies, like, towards the end. Jo is trying to figure out how to be, like, she's uncomfortable being, like, a girl, a woman, but because of the society propriety dictates that she has to do these things. And none of them are perfect. Like, that's what I really loved about the book, that she writes about the struggles, and she writes about what they're supposed to do, but it doesn't come easy for them, even for, like, Meg and Amy, who fall very much into, like, the womanhood and aspect, and or Laurie, like him, like, he doesn't want to be the kind of gentleman that, you know. So it's like, I think these kinds of themes, even though they seem old-fashioned, they are kind of
absolutely
timeless. So it's like writing about the struggles. And Good Wives ends with, like, all of them being married, but it starts with just Meg. But even like some of the things that she talks about, relationships and child rearing and like being an equal partnership, it's quite modern for like something that was written in, of course there's the veil of religiousness around, but I feel like the kind of religiousness that's portrayed here is that they're actually doing, they're practicing what they're preaching. And I think that comes from her, like the writer's family, sort of the politics and the upbringing that she had, where they weren't just, you know, sort of saying that, oh yeah, slavery bad. They were actually living what they believed. And that, like, I feel like in terms of religion, that's what they're doing here, which I think would be such a nicer way to engage with these ideas than these abstract rules that you wouldn't understand. So I really enjoyed these books, and I'm really looking forward to reading the next 2 books in the series.
And have you seen any of the adaptations on screen?
I have. So I'm going to make a Little Women month or week maybe for myself. I have seen the 1994 Winona Ryder one.
I think that's the one I've seen.
Yeah, I loved it. I got a DVD from a charity shop, watched it, loved it. I have another DVD now from the Greta Gerwig of Barbie fame's adaptation, and I've heard so many good things about it that I'm really excited. So that's going to be my weekend plan, to watch both those movies. I also have a graphic novel, which is like a retelling of, in modern times, it's called Meg, Jo, Beth and Amy, something like that.
Right, okay. Catchy.
And it's and it's like set in the present times about these girls. Like I said, it could be adapted. I'm also listening to a podcast.
Goodness.
I'm
You're right in
immersing
there.
myself in the culture. It's called Joe's Boys, a Little Women podcast, and it's basically like the host gets different people on every episode and they do a chapter discussion, and it's really fascinating. Like different people have different kinds of things, and in the beginning she always asked the host always asked, which March sister are you, including Laurie. You could be Laurie. And it's just like people find so much meaning out of it even now, which I find really touching actually.
I find I have read it. I've read it, but only Little Women. That it was quite to begin with quite American and quite unfamiliar. But the further you got into it, and like that you forgot that, you know, it was just a family who were poor, and how, you know, I think sometimes that puts people off as well. If, you know, a book is very much, you know, specifically American or specifically, you know, something else. But I do remember reading it, and because Joey friend, you know, putting it in the fridge when something bad happens. Yeah,
he must have read Good Wives, because I thought that she died at the end of Little Women, and she doesn't, because she does get sick, Beth. She doesn't die at the end of Little Women. It's at the end of Good Wives that she does. So you might have read them both without knowing
Well,
it.
do you know, I'm going to have a a reread, I think.
Yes. But I think lucky numbers, 4, 3, 5.
Yes.
Whatever millions she's made. Pick your number.
It's been lucky for her.
It has.
And does she have, you said she never married or anything?
No.
You know, does she have any family not left, because obviously there'll be like 127 or something?
That's a great question, which I wish I
Sorry.
knew the answer to.
I could see my question there. You were like, I don't know.
I mean, I might have known, the book might have said this at some point. I read it a couple of years ago.
That's your homework,
so,
then, to find out who's getting all the royalties from this.
But I don't think it's too old now for royalties. So maybe there's true. Like a. Yeah, I don't know who's getting. Yeah, I don't know what it's called when the family had the trust. I guess. Well, I'm quickly going to go with my other book, which is like poetry. I think what could have been a love of poetry in my life was crushed and smothered by teachers who taught poetry really badly in school, where it was about what the author meant and the grammar and the figures of speech, and like the poem itself was completely. And to add to that, I think growing up in India, we read a lot of poems that were quite unrelatable to us. A lot of stuff, a lot of British poem, a lot of old poetry. Some, I think, maybe Indian poetry, but no contemporary poetry, which I think is a bit of a struggle to relate to something when you're already a bit like not unsure about it. This one, I think, could convert people Yeah, because he is a very contemporary poet. I first came across Brian Bilston on Twitter. He just like shares his poetry on Twitter, and some of his poems have gone really viral. He writes about like really contemporary stuff, and some of it is serious and moving, and some of it is silly and funny and mad. So I think there's a poem for everybody. So in this book, what he does, I don't remember what his rationale for 366
I'm trying
days
to work.
was.
There's
Maybe it was
365
a leap
days.
year.
Oh.
That's what I think. That's what it
Okay.
was. Maybe it was a year that February
We had an
had.
extra,
Yeah. So he has like 366 poems, and he decides to make a project that I don't know if he wrote a poem for every day or he like sort of fit in a poem he'd already written for every day. But he just like, because he's writing, there's a poem for every day, he has to get really creative with like what can this day be dedicated for. So he's done like all sorts of research. So some of it is like really important, like UN human rights and refugees and whatever.
And does it tell you what day it is? Right,
So
okay.
every poem starts with a paragraph with like what day he's dedicating it to. So it could be like Pancake Day or
So
something.
he's telling you
He
before
is.
his poem.
Yeah.
And I
So-
noticed his second poem is not humongously large.
No, they're not. So that's what I'm saying. That it's like sort of a diversity of the kinds of poems. So I think it would be lucky. You would be lucky finding a poem, I think, that you like enjoy, or maybe like not hate. I guess I'm keeping the sort of barriers
Yeah, bring
really
it, yeah,
low.
uh-huh.
Because like I say, he writes like there's I remember an autumn poem which is not in this edition of the book, but the edition that I had read had like he'd written a poem about trees in the autumn and like leaves falling and stuff, and it's shaped in the shape
nice.
of trees, the leaves falling off trees, which I thought was lovely. And I could appreciate the artisticness of it. There's another one that he's written about Paddington Bear, because it was Michael Bond, the writer's, he either was born or died on that day, on January 13th. And I was so moved by that poem, because I don't know, are you familiar with Paddington
Yes,
Bear?
yeah.
So he was like, he came from darkest Peru and had a tag from his aunt saying, look after this bear. And he sort of made a connection with the refugee children coming here. And I wasn't like, I was just reading that poem over breakfast. I was like, oh my God, I was not expecting to get so emotional about this first thing in the morning. But yeah, so it was just, I think there's something for everybody. There's 366 poems.
Yes.
So you'll find something. And like, it's so, like, you know, it's if you read a poem a day as well, which I tried to do, and then like I let go of that project really quickly. Because the library books, I can't keep them for a year.
Not for a year, no, sorry,
So-
Pari. The good thing is, though, if you did it over your breakfast,
Yeah.
you know, every day you said, right, I'm going to
Yeah.
read this poem today, you know, you would get one every day, which could lead to more
Yeah.
poetry in your life.
And it's super accessible, I think. Like, even if you follow him online, he's on Facebook, I think, as well, and Twitter. He is, like, his poems are very now. So I don't know if, like, in another 150 years, like Louisa May Alcott, there'll be, like, the timelessness
Yeah.
of it. Some of them are, I think, because some of them just talk about, like, general stuff. Some of them are very specific. Like, he has one about Brexit as well. I think, like, not in this book, but, like, online. So it's just, like, different kinds of things. But I think it makes poetry not seem scary and something that I'm going to have to write an exam for.
No, I think you're right. At school, you kind of, like, I remember we had to learn a poem, and mine was the daffodil one. Yeah.
I remember.
And because you were learning it off by heart, so
Yeah.
you could stand up in front of the whole class and
Yeah.
say that poem, you never understood the poem, you just learned the words.
Yeah.
And because my teacher had found out my name was Jennie, and her favourite poem was a poem about a Jennie, I had to learn 2 poems, Pari, 2
Oh, that's
poems.
what injustice.
Yes. Now, when you're in second year at school, you know, it's like, really? What?
Yeah.
And it just, things like that put you off.
Yeah.
You know, it's like when you learn about Shakespeare at school, you hate Shakespeare
No,
and
absolutely.
everything about him because you're just reading this play with no context whatsoever.
Exactly.
And sometimes you need that. You need, you know, Shakespeare was written to be on a stage.
To be performed.
Poetry's written for you to read it and look into the poem.
Yeah,
You
and
know.
to also have, like, it be open to interpretation. I think in schools they sort of fix interpretations.
Yes.
They're like, what did the poet mean
Yes.
when he said something blue? Whereas, like, that's not what poetry is
No.
for. And it took me a long time to unlearn that. Like, to learn that poetry can actually be beautiful. Like, there are some beautiful poems in this, I think, but I discovered others. Mary Oliver is one she writes a lot about the nature and environment, and that really spoke to me. Like, some of her poems, and like I found like others. There's Good Bones by Maggie Smith. Look at me, just like that really came to me at the perfect time. I think, and it still makes me cry, like makes me emotional, because just like books, I think there's different. There is something for every reader, and I think poetry is similar.
I think as well at school, you look at a poem that might be like a page long, but to you that's like 500 pages long. Whereas, like I said, that wee poem for the 2nd of January is, you can't see this at home, but it's, that size. And you think, oh, that's manageable. I could read that 20 times. And each time I read it, over and over again, I would see something different. Whereas if you're given a big, huge, long poem, it's not the same.
But there's so many fantastic now, I think, modern children's poets who are writing for kids in a way that makes poetry accessible as well. I'm not sure how many of them are ending up in schools, but like Michael Rosen is a really good one. Shel Silverstein, Roger McGough, I want to say, you told me about him?
Roger McGough?
Yes. He is really good, and he writes like really gross, funny poems.
And his are good as well, because like that, sometimes they're shaped. Or, one of my favourite poems is like, a whole page, but there's only like 3 words on it, and it kind of looks like raindrops, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Brian Wilson has a bunch of that.
And it's accessible like that.
And like, it's fun. Like, I think poetry is seen as this serious, untouchable, artistic thing.
Yes, a bit snobbish almost.
Absolutely. And there is poetry like that, and some people really love that kind of poetry, but I think is an entryway. This doesn't take itself super seriously, which is how I fell in love with poetry. Like, I first read a book of nonsense verse by an Indian poet called Sampurna Chatterjee. It was called The Fried Frog and Other Funny, Foodie, Freaky, Feisty Poems.
What a fabulous title.
Right? It was amazing. Like, the title totally drew me in, and that made me, I'm like, oh my god, wait, poems can make you laugh. They can be relatable, they can be silly and fun. Like, and I think Brian Wilson can be your fried frog.
Excellent. I think it's a bit like jazz. I think, jazz is for everybody, but not everybody thinks it's for them. But once you find, because jazz is huge. I'm not a big jazz connoisseur, but it's so huge when you find your way in. And it's the same with poetry or something like that. When you find your way in, or graphic novels, as I recently found out.
Exactly, absolutely. And like, that's the good thing about a library. You don't have to pay to experiment. You can just get one for free and be like, oh, maybe this is for me. Oh no, this is definitely not for me.
And if you don't like it, you just take it back.
Exactly. Yep. So I think B should be happy with our offerings today.
She should be. Now, B has not told me the next theme.
Well, it's because I was near her, I guess.
I don't know if she was in a huff with me or what.
Or maybe she was just like, she got confused. It's so easy to get us mixed up. Right?
Well, we're both sort of rays of sunshine most of the time, so yeah. So what has B told us for
our next challenge is so hyper specific that you have to find a very specific book. Oh no,
Pari, I don't want that.
It's called Bits and Bobs.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah.
That's like totally opposite.
Yeah. Well, you know how she likes to mess with us. Yeah, Bits and Bobs. Isn't that fun to say? I think that's why she said it.
Yes.
B's Bits and Bobs.
Oh.
That could be a whole different podcast, I think. Yeah.
That could be a prequel or something.
Yes. Oh, to get away from the trilogy, I guess, to be a lucky number.
Oh, we'll have to think about that then.
Yeah. Well, hopefully this has been fun listening, as fun as it was chatting with you. And we shall say goodbye.
Yes. Bye.
Goodbye.